Well then, welcome everyone to the Building Your Own Dashboard workshop, which will be led by Shane Brott, who is the Geospatial Technology and Water Quality Specialist at the University of New Hampshire's Extension Cooperative. Is that the whole title?
Yeah, just perfect.
Yeah. Before I hand it over to Shane, I just wanted to let folks know that given that this is a workshop, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A on Whova. I will be monitoring that, but also feel free to unmute yourself and ask Shane a question directly. He wants us to be a little more free form after he gets through a few slides. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're all going to build dashboards. So take it away, Shane.
All right. So thank you all for showing up. It's amazing that this many people are here. So the idea behind this session was to give people a chance to find out a little bit more about dashboards and to directly start to make theirs using data that's already set up in the correct way. So I know that when I started playing with dashboards and insights, like even figuring out, do I have data? Is it set up in the right way? What sort of map can I make? How can I even, do all those steps to get started? The idea is that the beginning is going to be showing you a few examples of dashboards I've used. And if people have questions about those, I'd be happy to answer them. I've created 2 demo dashboards, one of which was the dashboard showing the NEARC participants that Emily showed, I think, in the first day. And then another dashboard that I'm going to use for tons of demos with completely made up data, just to give people a couple of different impressions. But both the NEARC participants for this year and the demo with fake animal sightings, both of those are tagged in such a way that they're easy to grab the map for. So for people to start creating dashboards, especially if they've never made any, those maps are available. I'll show you how to find them. And after the first 10 minutes or so here, you can grab those maps and bring it right into your own dashboard creation. I also realize that probably there's plenty of people on this session that have had experience with dashboards and likely know even more than I do, which is not hard to do, more than I do about specific instances. So I'm hoping that there's even some good examples that people have to share or some good discussion about different approaches. And I will say that the animal dashboard that I'm going to share with you has been changed a whole bunch of times over the course of the conference, because as I saw other people's examples, I had new ideas and started to make some changes in the dashboard I had only created a few days before the conference. So my plan is to start showing some basic uses of dashboards that I've used, show you the few demo ones I created, and then at least show you how to grab the map for those demos so that you can start making your own dashboard right away. And as Pam said, the chat in Whova is fine, speaking up is fine. It's funny, when we were talking a few minutes ago, I said, well, as long as we have less than 20 people, although it looks like we're close to 60 now, but I still think that's fine because the discussion is more important in sharing ideas and getting help than necessarily me just presenting. So probably at most in 15 minutes, I'll be done toward the sort of talking and showing part of it. And then throughout that, I suppose, at least in this part, it might be easier to put the questions or comments in the chat or in the Whova question and answer. But I think after that part, it'll be easier just to unmute yourself and speak up. So when I started using dashboards, probably back in March, in response to a lot of issues that Extension was having, trying to figure out how could we help people respond to what was happening in the world. And if you saw my web app or my presentation, talked a lot about this, but one of the things that I had never done before, but I became really involved with, is this new effort in New Hampshire to create a map that had food access information. And all of these data were collected actually in about a 2-week period in the beginning of this. And it was my job to help our Nutrition Connections team reach out, connect with people, and then create this map that would let us share information about food resources. And so this in and of itself had a whole bunch of different features. And we thought at first maybe we should use a dashboard, but I have to admit, I didn't know enough about dashboards. And also people wanted the tabs on the top. And so we went with that. But there is one dashboard that's inside of this map as one of the tabs, this directory tab. And the way this is designed to work is just to be able to have people sort really quickly. We have different types of information. So we have local food resources or discounts, we have pantries, and also the nutrition assistance offices. So people can pretty quickly and easily say, I'm looking for local food discounts in Cheshire County, and get down to only those items. You also, just randomly, a few people from Vermont and Maine put information in, which is fine. So you can sort it by that. And the county breakdown's only in New Hampshire. But one of the reasons I did this is also, just so you know, as you zoom in on the map, the data update based on the extent of the map as well, because we think in counties and extension, but most people probably think about what's close to them. One of the reasons I did this is I became more comfortable with dashboards, but also I got a lot of feedback, even from our own staff, saying, man, it's a pain in the butt to have to click on every single point to see what the information is for that point. We'd much rather just have a list. So in order to do that with a dashboard, I said, well, with an ArcGIS Online or story maps, that's really hard. But with a dashboard, that's pretty easy to have this list and have you control the list. I'm still interested in finding a way I can export it. Although I will say, if you just highlight this and copy and paste it into something like Word, it comes in very nicely. So they could winnow down to a place that they wanted. You say, okay, I'm trying to help support somebody in this area. They're looking for local food discounts. They at least can go see it on the map, so they could take a screenshot, or even just copy and paste this into a document and send it to somebody. And it did a really good job of solving a problem, which people on the traditional maps that we have that are more based on, an ArcGIS Online map and a story map, that as you went down and clicked, you could find, non-prepared food that's available for pickup, but you still had to go one at a time and click on the points to get the information, and people didn't like that. So the dashboard solved that problem. It also allowed multiple filters to happen, because the way that these tabs are set up, this is sort of one filter and then a second filter. But what if you wanted to find out what places you can pick up both prepared foods and non-prepared foods? It's hard to do that in a map unless you have 4,000 different filters, where if you do it in a dashboard, it's actually a piece of cake. And the interesting thing is this map is about to change, hopefully in the next few months, and it might move to an experience builder and have a lot more dashboards than it does currently. So that's just one example of how I've used dashboards to solve a specific problem. People did not want to click on the points. They wanted to see a list. Another way that I used it, and this is actually from our farm products map, but there's a similar version for the food, is to have our own staff be able to explore the data. So I happened to put this inside of a story map just because I wanted one link that I could send people to. And then each of these tabs that are here loads a different dashboard. And so it allowed people to look at a couple of different things. Number one, like, where are the farms? You could zoom into each individual place and click on a point to get some information about it. But you could also easily sort them. And again, in an extension system, we're very interested in the county system. So you can say, all right, what are the ones in Hillsborough County? And even what are the ones in Hillsborough County that were submitted on this day or on this day will give you some interesting information in case you're wondering, like, whoa, what were the group of people that submitted in the beginning? Or who are these stragglers over here who only submitted at the very last minute? So this was one interface that would just let people get at least a handle on the data, specifically sliced by the way that we're interested in looking at it. But then that multiple filtering was really interesting to be able to do, where you think about it in desktop or even in ArcGIS Online. I mean, how would you do this? You have a whole bunch of layers, you turn on and off for squint, or have these filters set up in ArcGIS desktop. Well, it's easy here. You want to say, all right, I want to go in Merrimack County and find out where you have pick your own and a CSA. And within a couple of clicks, you can get down to those locations. Also notice that this list here is being populated by these choices. And if you click on any one of them, you can zoom right down to that location. And I set the pop-up to appear as well. So this was designed to have the people who are working on the farm products team that are not GIS people at all, like, have one link that they could go to. And as long as they had an ArcGIS Online account, because this one is hidden behind the scenes. Although you could argue that this should be public, but this would let them, even non-GIS people, get a handle on their data and understand because there's one person in each county that's responsible, that has a job of connecting with the local ag in that county. And the interesting thing is they know that this isn't even close to the number of farms that are there, but also they've learned, even the people who work in these counties whose job it is to connect with the local farms, they've learned about local farms by seeing who submitted to the map. So it's been interesting for them, even though that public facing part is maybe what people are seeing and thinking about. I kept telling them the data behind the scenes is actually going to be intensely more valuable to us in the long term, and our ability to assess what's going on, even though we're putting this public facing map out. So this was part of what I created to show them. And then the other thing I was really worried about is maintaining the data. Like, how do I maintain the data? Or do I train people who don't know GIS to go behind the scenes? And these data were all collected in Survey 123. So do I give them a password to Survey 123? Do I create a web app and expect them to edit in GIS? Because I'm not doing the data maintenance. And it was frightening to me to even consider what that would be like. So what I did instead is I used dashboards. And this was part of one of my challenges to figure out, is how I could embed the Survey 123 form here. But this is a dashboard that, again, non-GIS people are using, that I developed and have changed over time based on what they said. And all I need to do is train people how to use this. And so there's 3 different tabs. Again, this is a story map that houses 3 different dashboards. So the idea is that down here, although they never use this, but I thought it would be good for them to see when it was last updated. Again, you can just select by county. Or you could even scroll down this list if you knew there was a specific location. So you're interested in this one farm, and by clicking on it, it would zoom right to that location. And what you can see over here is this Survey 123 form is churning away, and whatever item is in the center of that map, it loads the appropriate Survey 123 record into this side. So if we're here at this farm, or sorry, this is not farm, I'm back to the food access. To this site, it automatically populates that Survey 123 form with the information from this. So that means, let's say that somebody got an email that said, hey, the times that were open changed. All people have to do is go to this one link, log in. I mean, they don't even have to sort by all these things. They can just look on the big long list, click, go down to it. And then all they have to do is scroll down. Oh, that always happens. Scroll down the form and change these hours, and then scroll down to the bottom, which is a long form, and click submit, and it updates the data. So it allows them in this one interface with no GIS knowledge to be able to go in and manage the data easily. Once I started doing this myself, I realized that sometimes you want to be able to compare 2 sites at once. So I built a dashboard that lets you go to 2 sites independently so that you could compare their records. It's pretty much just the same thing, except these 2, like this map is linked to this list, and this site here is linked to this list, where this one is completely independent. And I designed this because often in the beginning, what you would have is people submitting the same site multiple times. And so you wanted to be able to compare the 2 sites and maybe decide to delete one or to copy and paste data back and forth between them. So then you could go to 2 sites independently and then be able to compare them. There was no way in this interface to delete. So what I had is on the bottom, there's a confirmation section, which I actually hid in Survey 123 by collapsing it so it's not as obvious. If you put, we've used it to have people track who last made the update, but if I typed delete into confirmation, there's filters on it that would remove it from the map. So that's our way to get around this. The one problem with this, there was no way to click delete. So that's what I do. There's a filter on that view layer that then will just remove it if they type delete in here. And then the final one is that we, in addition to the Survey 123 form that's used to build the map, there's also an update form. And so instead of having them have to like go back and forth and fight, I built this page where when updates are submitted, the updates show up right there on this side. Now, right now, there's no updates because these folks do a good job of going in here and managing it. But what you would do in the same way is you would click on a point or zoom down to that point for the update. This down here would show the results of whoever put in the update. And then you would find that same location over on this side and you would just make the changes in that survey 1, 2, 3 form that populates on the right. And then same thing here down at the bottom, there's a confirmation that you could use to control it. And you could just say, I can't think we used all set, or we agreed on a certain specific term that they would use to remove it from there. So in this one link with setting this up, you had people be able to manage the data just by simply poking around or seeing what was available in their county. You could have people be able to compare 2 different counties or 2 different sites and then be able to update them. And you had the ability of people being able to see information that was coming in by a form and then have them see it, find the right site over here, change it, and then be able to confirm that that update had been made. All of it just by knowing no more than how to use this interface. And so this was great. I couldn't, if I had figured out a way to not have multiple tabs, and maybe that'll be one of the things I'll learn over time, I could have done it all in one dashboard, but I felt it was really important that there was one link I could send them to. And all they would have to do was log in with the username and password, not having it spread over multiple places. And so the whole bunch of non-GIS people have been using this exact interface over the past 5 months or so to maintain the data. And they've been doing a great job. And this has changed several times. Some of the things I put in here at first I thought would be useful turned out not to be. So I removed them, but it's been an iterative process. And it's been fascinating to see how people in extension who never used GIS or never even thought of GIS, I didn't really know any of these people. Now it's become the way that they do their job in a large part, and dashboards have played a huge role in making data available for people to explore. And even this, being able to edit and maintain data, even though people have no idea about GIS at all, as long as they know how to use this interface, that's all they need to know. So I know that was a lot at once, but those were sort of the basics of at least the system that I set up to use for this farm map, for the food access and the farm products map, most of which is hidden from the public. But I wanted at least for people to see, since you're all GIS folks, to see how I use them from a more GIS management perspective. So I want to pause there and see about any questions before I go through to a couple of simple examples and then show people how to find those maps and hopefully get people started making dashboards. So.
Okay. Great. Shane, first of all, that's really cool. I never thought of using dashboard as a way to maintain data. Like I've just been looking at it as, how do I get some information out to a group? Never thought about using it for managing. That's pretty awesome. So we have a few questions. A couple have already been answered, but I'm going to read them anyways, just to see if you have some additional comments.
Sure.
So one that was posted, I think yesterday, was, can dashboards be utilized to convey live data, i.e. traffic updates, or would that need to be based on a data layer in a map?
Yes, and so Erica, I don't know if Erica's on or not, but it's funny, she's the one person I've been talking to already about this quite a bit. And so I actually would have said, I'm not sure. And she said, yes. And I think she already responded to it.
She did, yeah.
Yeah, I always thought that it had to be based on a map even. And she said, no, that there's ways to add data tables in to be the way that these indicators are fed. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of getting that in the right format, in the right location so that it's seen by the dashboard. And I do realize one of the reasons that came up is that she was talking, when we were talking about the difference between the beta version of the dashboard and the non-beta. I've just been using the beta because so be it. And apparently there aren't a ton of visible differences, but being able to connect to related tables is one of the differences.
Oh, interesting.
The beta currently doesn't work that way, and the other one does, although it's a feature they're going to implement. And that was the specific question she had for Esri, and which they may be answering right now in the other
hopefully.
But they did link to, I think Tom put up a link in one of the discussions to a comparison of
the two.
The beta, and that was one of the differences, that it currently doesn't support related tables, which means the old one did. So it's just a matter of getting your data in the right place for it to be seen.
Okay, that's good to know as well. I've been just using the dashboard, not the beta. So,
yeah.
So then these next two questions I think are kind of similar. One person asked if you inserted a dashboard into a story map, and I took the liberty of answering that one because I've done that. I was pretty excited to figure out how to do that, so I answered it.
Yep.
And then someone else was wondering, did you build your food access map in Dashboard directly or in Experience Builder?
No, I want to move it to Experience Builder. I used sort of like now I feel this way about dashboards. I used to, I guess I still sort of am. Whenever I have a problem, I try to solve it with a story map. So I don't know coding very well. I learned a little bit of CSS for the story map, but the structure inside of which all of that stuff existed for it is just a map series, an Esri Classic map series, story map. I think that Experience Builder will be much better once I get my head around it for this map, but I didn't know it existed, or if I knew it existed, I wasn't ready to try it. But yes, and in the story maps, like all of the examples I showed were it being embedded in story maps. So yes, and as you already said, it definitely works.
Great, okay. What type of format does the data need to be in to display in the dashboards? I'm assuming in AGOL. That was the full question.
Yeah, my understanding is it needs to be somehow in your organizational account in ArcGIS Online. I will say we're pretty simple in that I have an organizational account through UNH, but we don't have any higher level, more advanced systems. So there could be a ton of different ways that you could potentially connect. And I don't know if anybody else has more experience. We're as fancy as I get in some ways, we're pretty simple in what we have for data. So I don't know if anybody else has information about that who's on here. But
I'd be curious to know that. Like, because if you have Portal, could you pull in? I would think you could pull in from.
I would guess that there's ways to pull in as long as I think the key is that it needs to be, to make it visible to your dashboard, I think it has to be visible, in my case, to my organization.
Right.
So however you get that so that it's visible, and as long as it's some sort of web-enabled data layer, I think you should be able to bring it in, as long as there's, like I said, that's one of the things that Erica had with the beta, for example, didn't support related tables in the way that the non-beta did. So I think there may be some situations like that. But I doubt the idea that you're in Portal, so you can't you can't see that data layer, but I don't have any direct experience with that.
I was playing with it just the other day, actually just yesterday, and for some reason, like some of my data, I couldn't add it, and I'm thinking that maybe, and it was tables that I updated for a web map, and I'm wondering if, like, when I pushed them out, I didn't hit the right things, putting it from ArcPro onto AGOL, or I have no idea what's wrong. And I asked Tom during a session, and he was like, I'd have to see the data, and I gave him the
So I wonder, was it sharing?
I don't know why.
Did you?
It might have been, yeah, I might not have shared it correctly, but it was just data tables that are in my, associated with a layer in my web map. And I just updated the data because there was some QC that happened, and then I updated it in my web map. And then when I went to make a dashboard, just play with a dashboard yesterday with that map, it was like grayed out. That data was grayed out. So I'm just curious if anybody's had that experience and know what I might have done wrong, but I'm gonna have to play with it more because I don't know what I did.
Yeah. Just try again. It might work.
Yeah.
That's what I do.
That didn't work. Let's to the left, maybe. And
yeah. All I know is it's grayed out, and I'm like, okay, I can display the water quality data from this river, but not these rivers. Okay, great. This is incomprehensive, so I'll figure it out. But just sort of ask that, and as a warning.
Yeah, well, I think that is like the joys of this, right? The joys is figuring out like which button did you not click, or did you click in order to get to show up, right? And I think that to me, and it's funny, in extension, I feel our role is a certain thing. And not specifically to you, but often I'll get in these conversations and I'm like, that sounds like a good question for your Esri rep. Like that is very specific to your situation. But also this is a good format. I mean, a forum for that. But one thing I want to do is, if there are no more specific questions.
No, there are two more.
The next couple of steps so that people could see. All right, whenever we're done with those questions, so people can start making their own dashboards. By 10, I want to go to the next step.
Okay, these may be both questions that you're going to say, talk with your Esri rep. So let me just go through them. As a non-GIS professional, my question is, would you compare public searchability, accessibility to data that is presented on a story map versus a dashboard versus Experience Builder and any other Esri platform that is relevant? Also, how accessible are these different platforms to an individual or nonprofit, i.e. someone wanting to use them for money making, but not for money making, but public education, sharing a citizen science project?
Okay, so here's the accessibility. I have to admit, I don't know specifically. It is a big point to be aware of. And I do know, especially with story maps, they have added some accessibility settings, and especially in the new template, they have even more. And I did about a year and a half ago, I taught some Maine cooperative extension staff how to use story maps. And the person at the training was one of the head web people for the University of Maine. And so he asked that question specifically, what about accessibility for story maps? Because we at the university can't use something unless it meets certain standards. And so I quickly scrambled, I looked, and I found Esri's statement, like their specific statement on accessibility for even the old version of story maps, the classic version. And so I sent that to him afterwards. And I said, please look at this, let me know what you think. And so he found it, he read it, and he said, you know what? Based on what they're saying here, this meets our standards. Like I would say for the University of Maine, at least for sharing data, he's like, the story map itself. He's like, I don't know about the maps themselves. That might be different, but the story map, even the classic story map, based on this statement that Esri put out, it meets what we need in order to feel comfortable using it for the university. So to know that those existed, I should actually go through and find the links for all of those specifically. I do know one thing, dashboards work a lot better like on a tablet than I think the interactive maps in a story map do, because it's like bigger targets and buttons versus having to click on points. Just one of the reasons on the food access map, I actually bothered to do the CSS to create buttons instead of links, because I thought it was easier to click. But the specific accessibility, I think there's statements by Esri, and it's a good question. I know they exist and I should have them all at my fingertips. So I don't know about Experience Builder because I've only aspirationally thought about using it, but I hope to use it soon and know more about that. As far as accessibility from the standpoint of can people use these, anybody can use story maps with a free public account. And there's really no difference at all currently between a free public account and a paid account for what you can do with story maps. Really, there isn't that I know of. There may be in the future, I don't know. And there is one type of story map, which is now in mature status, but you can still create, called a crowdsourced story map. People know that you still can make those, even though they're kind of hidden and tucked away. But that one is one example of a story map that you need to have a paid account, because in order to collect the data, you need that function, that remote editing function, which comes with a paid account. I do know, and I only recently learned, that dashboards are only available if you have a paid account. You cannot create dashboards with a free public account.
Oh, interesting.
I think it has to do with the fact of the way that the data are hosted in ArcGIS Online, or maybe they just made a decision that it has to be a paid feature. But I'll also, and I'm guessing Experience Builder has to be a paid feature. Don't know for sure, but I would be flabbergasted if that was a free.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does.
It doesn't make any sense why they would make that.
Yeah, no, I think you have to have a paid account to use Experience Builder.
You know, ...
I think
but,
Hub is the same thing. I'm not sure.
Maybe, but the thing is that you can get a paid account. So if you're a nonprofit or you are like a person trying this out, as long as it's not specifically to make money, you can get a one license ArcGIS Online organizational account for not very much money. Like the home use license is $100 a year. The nonprofit license is $100 a year. You just get approved as a nonprofit institution, and you can get an organizational account of one for $100 a year. So it's not going to give you all of the functionality that you might want, but it'll make you it'll let you make dashboards. You can use Survey 123. It doesn't give you tons of credits, but if your goal is to use dashboards and you have some data, and the only thing stopping you is getting an organizational account, there are ways to get it depending on your situation that are not incredibly expensive. So it's still money and it still is an annual subscription. And if you stop paying it, your things will stop working because it will close down. But there are not incredibly expensive ways. And there used to be a conservation grant program, but it's not that. It's a nonprofit. You get certified as a nonprofit, and then you're able to get access. At least that's my familiarity with the pricing. I do know one group I've worked with, they got an account that had one organizational account with one full user, and then they got one, I don't remember the term, but basically just a license to let people view it so that they could send it around to the board members to see before they shared it publicly, and that was $50. So for $150 a year, an organizational account, do whatever they wanted organizationally within, constraints of credits, but
Yeah,
and
I
then
was
they
just
had
gonna add
another,
that.
and then they had another account that they could send to board members or let people view things, but not have it visible to the public. So if nothing else, there's a relatively inexpensive way to get it. But with story maps, to my understanding, there's really no difference between a public account and a paid account when it comes to the maps you can create and share. Your ability to collaborate with people and your control over if it's public versus private. I mean, that's it with the public account versus public, private groups, collaborating with people from other organizations. None of those things can be done with the public, but you want to create and share story maps, free public account works basically the same as the paid.
Shane, a component of the question was really about how people find what you've done. So, and that's what I meant about searchability. I mean, if someone wants to look up a topic, let's say a Christmas bird count in a particular count circle or the Christmas bird counts in general, how, would they get a hit on Yahoo or Google or other common search engines if it's in, a story map or a dashboard? Or I think it wouldn't.
I don't know, if you search for New Hampshire food access, our story map comes up pretty high. So, okay. But our article on our website about it comes up higher. So like whenever I search for it, I find it within the first few hits on most search engines. But
okay, so story maps and dashboards that are Esri products can actually come up on a general search engine.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. But yeah, the article about our search, about the map, usually one is like just above it, and then right beneath it is the map itself. Yes, they do. Whether or not what kind of pull they have, or even if a dashboard would come up higher than a story map, higher experience build, I don't know, but they are, at least the story map is searchable. It's fine. I find it all the time.
Okay, so Shane, we're at 10:05 and there are some other questions, but I think that I'll take your thoughts of as we go through this workshop, people can unmute and ask their questions. So I apologize if I didn't read your question. If it hasn't been answered, perhaps you can fit it in sometime in the next hour.
Yeah, thank you. And because I wanted to do these next two steps. One is showing very quickly some basic dashboards that I created, and then showing people how to add those maps and start to create a dashboard with them so that everybody can try it themselves. As we mentioned, you do have to have an organizational account in order to be able to create a dashboard, but I will also say, and this is something that maybe they can do through the Q&A, or I can even put up on the screen, I can provide organizational logins for people because we have some for training. So if you don't have an organizational account and you want to try to build a dashboard, let me hang with me for like the next 4 minutes, and then I will provide one for you. Maybe that's something they can do in the Q&A. But so there's two different sort of simple-ish dashboards that I have the data easily available for people to use. And this is this NEARC dashboard that I built with the data from this year's conference. So the way that this is configured is that you can choose based on the event attended, whether it's both events, just Educators Day.
Shane, your screen is not being shared.
Yes, that's good because it wasn't updating either. So you can see that.
Start over.
Let me refresh. I always do that when I'm in the middle here. Let's see, share screen. Where are we? Share. Okay, so this is the dashboard that Emily showed earlier, and there's no personally identifiable information even in the thing that's published. So no, you can't tell who anybody is, although when you click on it, you can get some basic information. So this shows based on attendee organization and category. This category is based on how people registered. Down here, you have information about if you're a first time or not. And then if you attended Educators Day only or the whole conference. And as you can see, all of these things adjust based on the options that are chosen here. And but this stays constant. So as I zoom in to look at a specific region, for example, the total attendees stay constant, but all the rest of these update. And as you click on any of these categories, all of those update appropriately. So that's one example. And so the map for this, I'll show you how to get it so you can bring it in, that map itself, so you can start building your own dashboard using the same data and the same map. And the other one are created this data layer a while ago in a teacher demonstration. So here are these critters that are found in New Hampshire, which are chupacabras, jackalopes, the platypus, and yeti that are sightings throughout the state of New Hampshire. And the way that I've designed this data and this dashboard is that you have these little indicators for how many are currently available on the map. You also have the ability to show, are adult males present, females, or young, and you can even set to see the different levels or different sightings by the type of animal and also by the season of observation. So the way that this works is as you zoom in, all of these update appropriately based on what's being shown. This total creature stays static while this one changes. And then I've set these up so that you can select any of these. And this you can either set up so you can only select one, or you can select multiple. So if you wanted to see any individual species, or you can say, you know what, where can we find adult male chupacabras in the spring? And then be able to winnow it down only to those sightings. So this is one of the examples of the dashboards that I changed over the course of this conference, because these, the idea of coloring the text and also coloring this number made it stand out a bit more compared to what it used to be. And of course, there's lots of, we talked about colors and how you can go back and forth a million times with colors, but these are all linked together. These are not clickable. There's nothing that that's going to happen when you click on these or this, but these are all indicators that are looking at the information that's on the map. But as you choose these different elements, these update and are also clickable to then give you these indicators that update. Also, you can control what the text says, like all the platypus are hiding or whatever. So there's even the ability to control instead of just saying no data. Or if you move this out of the way completely, all of these have their little, nope, there's no data here, and you have control over those as well. So this is just another quick example that I plan to use in a whole bunch of different ways that have been updated over time. So these are just two examples, this map and these data that are configured, and set up. And it's a pretty simple just spreadsheet that I use. And these data as well can all be found. These maps can be found and added to any dashboard by simply going to your ArcGIS Online account and searching up here or any place where you can do real search for data and search for NEARC demo. All one word. And if you search for NEARC demo, you can find both of those maps. Notice if you're in an organizational account, this button always tricks people. The default is mostly to search within your own organization. So if you search for it and you didn't find it, make sure that you check that off. I mean, those happen to be in my organization, but they're not in anybody else's. And then the only stage once you find the map is you go to the item details. and then you click Create Web App, and then Dashboards. So that creates a dashboard using that map as the starting point. So again, to find it, click on this search bubble, go to NEARC demo. Make sure that you are not looking only inside your own organizational account. Click either here or down here to get to item details. And then click Create Web App and Dashboards. Now there's other ways that you can do it, but for the starting point for people who are new to this, this is by far the easiest, most straightforward way to do it. So you can choose, if you have your own data, then that's fine too, but I wanted to have at least 2 examples that people could choose whether they want to be searching for critters in New Hampshire that don't exist, or they want to use the NEARC data from this conference to be able to bring them in. Of course, once you do the dashboard, you have to enter some sort of name and some sort of tag. And then it will bring you up to this other interface where you can start to build your dashboard. And the first thing it'll do is plop the map on, but then all the different components you can add to the dashboard are all up here at this plus button. And all of these you can click to add. You have to choose exactly what data layer you'd like to interact with. So I'm going to say like the participants. And then it's a matter of configuring these elements. And I will say the most important thing is to decide down here. You won't see anything until you pick the field. So if you want, like, if they're first time or not, you have to choose that first and then have all these other elements allow you to configure it. The one thing I will say that's the key is down here with actions. So that's how you choose how this interacts with other elements. When you click on actions, I mean, right now there's only very little to interact with, but by choosing this, you're saying when you change the selection on here, I would like you to filter that information on the map. So the key things are setting the data up to show whatever it is that you want to do. What do you want to show? A lot of these are just how you'd like it to look. And then those actions are how do you want it to interact? You want to have a single selection or multiple? And when somebody clicks on this thing, what do you want to happen? Those are really the key. Which data do I show? And what do I want to happen when this is clicked on? Now you can have elements that don't change at all. Like if you never wanted something to be changed, just make sure that there's no actions pointing to it. But if you want this click to do something, it could just, right now there's only the map. So if I set it up to do that, when I click on the map, it's going to change it. But when I go back to configure it, if there were 17 different items, I could set it to goes to 17 of them, or only 2 of them, or 5 of them. And the other thing is when you know that when you first start to make it, it's going to look hideously ugly because it'll just randomly add these components to different parts. But how you move them around is by dragging it, by using this little directional up here where it says drag item. As you're moving it around, notice how those targets appear. And what you can do with those targets is use your pointer, not where you're dragging the blue box, but where your pointer is located. And you can see how when you move your pointer over it, it clings to those sides. And you can move it around and drag these components back and forth by just grabbing the edge. So when you first start to make it, it'll look really ugly. I think the Esri people used to say they had an option called make ugly map as the default color scheme whenever you added random things to your map. This just allows you to create and move it around after the fact. And then as you add more, they'll pile up and you can structure them however you want. So those are at least the quick basics so that people can find the data on the map and start clicking. There's a lot more I could do, but I wanted to get people at least that far. So if you had never tried it before, you could. And again, the idea is you go back, search for NEARC, no space, demo, and add your map as a starting place, and then add these different components. So this is the part where there could be like 28 different directions we could go because there are some questions that people have. Also, I know for people who have this is their first time with dashboards, even what I showed you might not be enough, but I'm interested to hear what can I do, or what questions are there, or for people who are new users, what else do you want to see at least to get started? But before any of that, does anybody need an organizational login? Is there anybody out there who does not have one, but who wants one in order to try this out?
I have a question, Shane.
Go for it.
So when we look at the data table, if we want to slice and dice information a little differently, can we add any columns and kind of massage the data? Like add a column that says region and then group the states into regions so that we could, demonstrate the information that way?
You mean in the current data, the current data table that's driving this map, you mean?
Yeah, can that be edited by the user at this level?
I don't know. I don't know how I set it up. You could try it, but I don't even remember how I configured it.
Okay, because I'm looking at the data table and I can't see an edit option, so I just wondered.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, if it was your data, you should be able to, but I don't, I think I probably tried to set it up so it couldn't be edited.
Okay.
Well, I mean, the big thing about these clicks that you realize in dashboards is that you have to figure out how to set up your data so that you have the right options to be able to make it a tool, right? To be able to click, to make it the pie chart, or to add those buttons at the top. Those what they call the selectors. So the one other thing that I'll mention is that on these buttons that are here at the top, these selectors and these categories, you can't create those in the normal flow of the dashboard. In order to create those, you have to add either a header or a side panel. So in a header or a side panel, if you add either of those, when you hover over it, there are different options like add category selector, add number selector, add date selector. So there are certain types, and that's part of the strategy is like, what would you want to put up here? What would you want to put down here? Like, do you want people to see the graph of how many types of critters? Well, it has to be down here if you want it to be a graph. If not, you can have these different options and buttons here on the top. So, but in order to have those sorts of items, or even this registration date selector, so you could see people who registered at the last minute, all of those have to be either in this top header or over here in a side panel. That gives you different options to add those types of interaction.
So quick question, I may have missed this, but clicking on a pie slice is limiting it, but I'm wondering what does it require to make it zoom to the selection? So the action for clicking on the pie is to go to the participants list, which is the map.
Yep.
But how do you get it to actually zoom to the entire set of education, for example, if you click on the education slice?
Well, some of them, so that's within the pie chart, that's not, at least currently, that's not an option. So if you see here, like filter, for example, that is the only choice that you have. But there are other elements, for example, a list. So if I dropped a list on here, map legend, list, I won't even really care what this list is very much. Let me just add a list, even though it'll be boring. So the list itself, when you look at the configure options for actions, you have more choices for actions. So that is one of the limitations, and that's part of like, the puzzle of putting it together, is that maybe it would be nice, and who knows, maybe that's a feature request that we could make, that in addition to having filter, they would also have these other elements of zoom or flash, but the list definitely has more of those. And so back in that other I mean, the way that these are set up so that when you click on these points here, it zooms to that is using that function. But when they have more options for actions, you can see that here.
Okay, so a related question would be for starting with that pie chart, looking at the actions for it, you can choose multiple, and the actions could be to show that on the map, but also show the list.
Well, you can, if a list exists, yes. So now that there's a list here,
Uh-huh.
I can also have it filter that list.
Okay, now you can add another target. Okay.
Yep. So part of it is you need to, you kind of build it as you go along, but you also need to have all of the elements on there in order to make those final connections to those individual elements. So usually go in fits and starts, but yes.
It wasn't showing me the list. It wasn't showing me that I had another option because I hadn't already created the list.
Yep.
Okay, so now that you have the list, if you make the list zoom to the area, will that make all of that work together?
Well, so then of course what you need to do, and now you're starting to go down the wonderful rabbit hole, is in order for that to work, you need to configure the map. So let's go back to the map. And map has several options. It has layer actions, right? Where you can do different things like filter, flash, pan for those interactions. So if you use the selection tool to click on the map, there's various things you could do. Although from a non-GIS user standpoint, I get very nervous about the idea that people have to pick up the selection tool in order to have something happen. But also you have the map action, which is really powerful. When the map extent changes, then what do I do? So for example, if you say when the map extent changes, change the pie chart. If you clicked on a list, or sorry, let me set this up. So if you had it set, so when you click on a list, it zooms on the map. When you click on this list and it zooms on the map, it'll update the pie chart. But that's because the map was set here. When map extent changes, then filter that pie chart. Does that make sense? Yeah, it's like this layers of an onion. And trust me, one thing you definitely need to do when you're done with your dashboard is play with it in a browser that you're not logged into, or that you're not in editing mode, hopefully. But you're going to find out even sometimes a week later that you missed one connection. Even when I was demoing this to somebody on Sunday, I was moving back and forth and things weren't updating. I'm like, I forgot one of the connections to make that work. But it's like this process of adding various connections over time. But yeah, so this map here is set such that when it moves, that map extent is changing this, and this. What it's not touching is this, the total critters observed. I also made it not change these. It could. So when I zoom in, these could change, and only the ones that are visible would be in the map extent would be available. But I sort of made the strategic decision that would be a little too confusing. It's like menu items changing in a website. So you could do that. And when there's no available things, it would actually have a little, instead of having any buttons, it would just say no data or whatever expression you wanted. So it was a strategic decision for me to keep these up and available regardless if there was anything on the map, but you could configure it. So it's hitting all of these things by the extent. I know there's a whole bunch of questions. I just want to double check to make sure, is there anybody out there who needs an account to make one of these now? So I haven't heard anybody say yes, but I want to be sure that that's the case. All right, Pam, do you want to look at some of the questions that
I
are
do.
outstanding? So
Yes. So this one I'm very intrigued by. Can you or how can you insert a story map into a dashboard?
oh my goodness. Going through the looking glass, right?
I know, right? I was like, whoa, I've done dashboard into story map, but I haven't done story map into dashboard. I don't know if that's possible.
I asked about that. They told me yes.
Yeah,
They
no,
did?
it is. Yeah, you can, I mean, so if you think about when I showed you, hold on one second. When I showed you these the idea that you could use the Survey 123 integrated into the dashboard. So if I go back to here, like this is a Survey 123 instance that's integrated into the dashboard. Now, how that's done is that you use this. Shoot, you know what? I lost my good glasses and I've been trying to do this whole thing without my glasses, except for my broken ones. No. The embedded content.
Okay.
So
I wondered about that. So if you put in a URL to the story map, you can embed it right in there.
we're about to find out. See what happens. So then you ask yourself, is it a good idea? Or in what cases is it a good idea? That's a whole different question, but yep, you can do it. So any content that's embeddable, which doesn't mean every single website that exists, but should be every story map, should work. Figuring out what the right way to use that is and where it doesn't work, knowing that any story map is going to be flexing based on the space it's given inside of your window, based on the size device that you're on. So it may work well, sometimes it may not work well, but yep, any embeddable content can be embedded.
Awesome. Okay, so I think this question goes back to that food access map where you're having the comparisons. The question is, what about data that needs to be QC'd, validated before you want it public? Is there a way to at least symbolize changed data differently so users know it is preliminary?
Yeah, and I think there's a bunch of ways you could do it, right? So one way you could do it was to use, and the way we did it is, the way that would be the most, there's a bunch of different ways. The way you would do it with ours, the way that we have ours set up, and I guess I should just keep sharing my screen the whole time, but that we have ours set up, which certainly is not to say that it's the right way to do it, but we have a lot of ours, the data management part of it done down here inside of this question, which is publicly visible, and I collapse it to make it less likely that people will enter it, and it's still public, and it's because we use the web form. If you think of use Survey 123 Connect, you can create a field that's not visible to the public, but in the web form you can't. So you could have codes here, like we put this confirmation field to be just a multi-use field. So you could have a filter that's looking for a certain word in there, a certain code or a certain item. So it could be like prelim or something you would probably choose that wouldn't be what anybody, if they happen to see it, would randomly type in, but the people knew. You can have filters set in your map to say, hey, if it says prelim in the field confirmation, then symbolize it this way. And if it doesn't say prelim, or if it says final, for example, symbolize it this way. So you could do that with just text in this field and filters in ArcGIS Online to symbolize things differently. You could also have drop-down menus that has different status. The question is whether or not, if you're using Survey 123, if you want it to be publicly accessible, that people could tweak it. And I think, again, with the web app, the web creator, you can't hide things from people that I know of, although hopefully that might change. But so that was our approach, is you can create a group of questions. You can make it collapsed by default. So it's a collapsed group of questions that are non-required. So I suppose people could click on it and they could change it, but they probably won't. And also, as long as you use a code that nobody else would do by accident, would be fine. But I don't know if anybody out there has used Survey 123 Connect, but I think you can create questions that are in, so, fields in the data table that are not visible for people to fill out. So that's probably the better way to do it, as long as I'm correct about that with Survey 123 Connect, would be to have those data maintenance fields there, but not have them be published as part of what people can fill out. Anybody out there who uses Survey 123 Connect could talk about that? And Jonathan did say in the chat that there are ways to leverage Experience Builder with Survey 123 to get crowdsourced input. So yeah, very interested in looking at and learning more about Experience Builder. And I'm driven to it based on the needs that I had for this, and especially the food access map. I mean, the food access map, the way it is now, is set up to the best of my barely coding ability with the tools that I had access to and knew how to use. But I will say the idea that you can configure what the mobile version looks like in a different way and you have direct control over that in Experience Builder is really appealing to me. And I will say that's one of the big limitations of dashboards. On mobile devices, they're not great. And I'm hoping that they work on it better. And I have heard some people say they used Experience Builder with a combination of dashboards that were specifically designed for mobile devices to sort of get around part of that problem. But if you look at our dashboard for the food access map on a tablet, it looks fine. But if you look at it on a smartphone, it looks pretty bad. And I think that is just a built-in maybe struggle right now with dashboards, at least in my experience. Are there any questions I'm missing? I see a lot in the Q&A, but.
Yeah, Brittany had one asking about if you could speak to how to format the original point data that you used in the dashboard. You know, any special settings, attribute, formations, need for binary 1 and 0s.
Yeah, I'll just show you what I did with, I'll show you what I did, which certainly doesn't mean that it's right, but at least the data that I used to create these can show you what those look like. And it's a choice, right? And I think that is one of the big questions with all GIS is how do you set up your data to make the map or do the analysis that you want to do? And so at least so you can see, I'll open up the data tables for those two. Which one did I use? I think I used this one. Just so you can see what they look like. And this is from somebody who doesn't manage a lot of data. And we don't have sophisticated databases. I mean, one of the reasons that I was so excited I got to start using dashboards is that by collecting the data for the food access map and also for the farm products map, I finally had some data I could work with. So this is all that the spreadsheet that feeds the NEARC dashboard looks like. That's all. Pretty straightforward and simple. And then the critters dashboard looks like this. But yes, I made some decisions. I was even thinking, could I do number of adult males and number of adult females and number of young? And in the time I had and the type of dashboard I wanted to make, I just decided to put yes, no to make it easier. But that would be part of the strategy of figuring out. And that was, to me, one of the most difficult parts of getting started with insights and dashboards, even having data that were set up that were able to be brought in. And that's partially because in my job, I don't do a lot of data management or maintenance, and probably most of the other people at NEARC, that's a lot of what they do. So they probably already have data set up, but how you have it set up does determine how easy it is to create those interactive elements. You know, and the idea that the seasons was all in one list, this is a good example. The season, the spring, fall, summer, winter was all in one field, made that interaction possible when you look back at this selector. The reason that I was able to do this so easily is they're all in one field. If they weren't, if they weren't all in one field, then it would be much more difficult to do. And also I would say, and I'd love to hear other people's opinions about this, this works by far the best, all these interactive elements, when all of your data is inside the same data layer. Because really it operates on, like if you wanted to have a pie chart that represented information from more than one data layer, I don't think you can do it, or at least there's no easy way to do it. I suppose if your data layer could then reach out to related tables, it might be easier, which again seems to be one of the limitations of the beta at this point. But these all work, and all of these easily can be brought in together and interact well because they're within the same data layer. So that was one of the challenges, is setting up the data so you have these three options here and you cleanly in one selector, versus if you had like different columns that said spring, yes, no, fall, yes, no, you'd have to have a much different setup here in your dashboard. But knowing that I wanted them to look this way and work this way, I decided to set up these in that way so that all of that information, like species, was all in one field.
So Shane, working off of that, the species, can you show us how you go through creating those buttons on the heading to, I know you kind of showed us how to get in there, but could you walk through that?
Yep. So when you go to all participants, this is, oh boy, this is so ugly. Always happens. Well, let me get rid of that. That'll help. And let me I'll just get rid of almost everything except for the map so that it's cleaner to look at. Okay, so in order to have those selector buttons, you do need to have, again, a header or a sidebar. And you can see there's different options, the date selector, number selector, and this would be a category selector. So on this map, actually, let me just zoom out first. Love how these tools cover up. Let's see, configure the map just for 1 second here. Zoom out. All bookmarks extend. Okay, so I added a header, and then I go down to category selector. And so within category selector, there's several things I can set. One's the actions, but then also the selector elements. And this is a little bit odd. I will say this is one of the things I struggled with at first, but you do have to choose either the feature or grouped values and then choose what it is that you want to interact with. So I've usually used group values. I think features will show a list. So if we say like features, it'll show a list of all of the items, where grouped values, you're going to go ahead and it will make the category selector the way that you probably will want it. And then you choose whatever it is, what field you want it to be based on. So let's say it's organization type. Is it not group values? It's features. Yeah, this is the thing I always wind up struggling with, and then I remember how to do it. Organization type. No, there's one. Shoot. It shows you as many times as you've done this. Oh yeah, slant, button bar. There we go.
There you go.
Yeah, so there's, yeah, as many times have I done this. So you choose the category field. You want it to be grouped values. Oh yeah, it did work. Okay. You want it to be grouped values versus features. When you do features, it's when you're going to have this big, giant, long list. When you do grouped values, that's when you're going to have it parsed. And then you choose the field. So let's say it's first time. Oh, sorry. Organization type, group values. Then I'm going to do a button bar. So that's first time, for example. So you have a yes, no, or a category. And I don't know, I personally like the button bar better than I do the drop-down menu, but. And then this is the option where you have either single or multiple. So the multiple will let you click both of them, or single. And this is where a little bit of the strategy starts to come in, because what if you wanted to have them be both, where you wanted to see all of it regardless, but you didn't want to have people select both of them? So let's say that we put multiple down here and just go on. Sorry, go back to configure. Oops. Group value, first time, actions, add target, this map. One other thing that's a little tip is to make sure that you change this name. So we'll say first time selector. Because whenever you start to go through and try to link things back and forth, it's really, really useful for you to be able to not just have it be the default name, because it gets really confusing about what is what. This none option, this is part of the thinking. You might think this none means don't show anything, but what it means is that there's no filter. So in this case, the none would be either yes or no. Or you could say all attendees. Why is it showing no data? Well, that's fun. There we go. I will also say one of the bugs I found is every now and then, even though it should be showing data, it doesn't. So if you zoom in and out, it forces it to show it. So that this would be your ability now to be able to show if all people are yes or no. And I will also just say that in the category selector configuration, I would only, I'm going to do just single. And then say I want a none option, and I'm going to call that all. By the way, you can't configure exactly how things are lined up. Like if you look at the seasons, they don't go in the order of the seasons, they go in alphabetical order. But you can choose the way that it's positioned, perhaps, but also where you want this none, you can have it be the first thing or the last. And you can also have what is the default thing that's selected. If you're having a single selection, something has to be selected. So you could have like all be last and have the default selections. You can move things around however it is that you want things to be set up.
Okay, are you ready for another question?
Yeah, but let me just make sure that this is actually working the way that I think. Yep. So, and then usually the question is, one last thing I wanted to show is that like it doesn't say what the answer is, and no as a response for first time, like all yes, no, what does that mean? So you could change what those mean. That's the one other trick that's really important is notice where it says load categories. You could change it. Even though the data table says yes or no, you can change what the label is. So by clicking load categories, I can say, oh, first time attendee, the answer is yes. Why don't we put first time attendee, first time, or just even first time. And then you could put long time, for example. Because then instead of having yes, no, even though it was a yes, no answer, you have something that makes more sense for people to click on than yes, no. And again, that there as you click on load categories. And then you can configure what the labels are for those categories. I will tell you that the selector button, learning how to load the different categories and change them and figuring out how the none option works was really key in setting things up the way I wanted, but it took some mental gymnastics to figure out the right settings for it to work. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. So, well, first, I just want to thank you for that because I didn't know about that the button options and the, you know, that's just like you're customizing your legend, right? You know, you can load what is your data says, but, you know, you can always rewrite it. It still is pulling from your data table when you're doing a legend.
For the categorical selectors, it's so important to be able to do
that.
But you can do it on all of them. It's not just those. You can do it on the pie charts and that none option and getting your brain around what does none mean, what's the right word, and how does that work? Those are the trick for those, but okay.
Somebody would like to know if you'll be offering a more extended dashboard workshop at UNH Extension virtually this year.
That would be my plan. That is the thing that I've been thinking about ever since I started doing this. I will say that this, both trying to have one of these little sessions at at the Educators Day, and then today was my first step towards that. But yes, that is my plan, to make a dashboard, probably 3-hour workshop that's more structured than this and has more details, is part of the plan. Actually, after this conference, I'm going to start planning it and developing it, probably starting to offer it in January. That's the plan. And all of our classes for now are all going to be remote. I have no assumption we're going back in person anytime soon. So we've been offering remote classes actually since April of last year, of 2019. But now all of our workshops are remote only for the foreseeable future, which means people could join them potentially from anywhere.
It's good to know. And so they just go to the extension website and
Yeah, so my
but you send out notices too, right?
Yeah, our training page is the URL that's easy. It's gisworkshops.org. It will just direct you. Our web page changes all the time. So I bought that long ago to have people hit our front page. There's also a newsletter that we send out once a month, although I haven't sent one out for 4 months. But there's a newsletter you can subscribe to. If anybody has questions about any of that, they can get in touch with me, but gisworkshops.org will bring you to the page, and any of our workshops will be visible there. That one doesn't exist yet, but hopefully by late November, there'll be news up about it. And I would guess probably early January would be the first time we do it.
Okay, so this is a question going back to the New Hampshire food access map. Could you just acknowledge whether you used a web app builder or story map to create that?
I used both. Well, this itself is, this is a story map. So this is just a classic story map. It's map series. And the reason they wanted map series is because they wanted the tabs. So I showed them various options, and the people I was working with, they really wanted the tabs. I think it was because also it looks like more familiar to them. I will say that I did use a web app, and it's right here. So when I load the page at first, I wanted to have a screen. I wanted to have a splash screen when the map first loads. And part of the reason was, at first, the maps in a map series on a mobile device, when you click on the point, the info button the bubble doesn't pop up. I found this out the day before we launched it. You need to double click on the points in order for them to pop up, to come up, which is like incredibly frustrating, but it just is the way it is. So this initial pop-up would basically have this little description that would say, hey, people, click twice on the points. Over time, I wound up creating a mobile version, just because this Franken app version that I created with all these tabs that had different story maps and dashboards, on a mobile device, it looked terrible. So I did create a more mobile friendly version, which is just a map journal story map, which on a mobile device works and acts much better than this conglomeration of things. So I then use this pop-up to try to direct people to the mobile version. And this is one of the reasons the Experience Builder appeals to me so much, is that I would get away from this problem and having to maintain in 2 places. But the only way I could figure out to get a pop-up was to use, in that tab, it loads a web app builder. Or just this single simple map with just the blue state with the extension logo. And its only purpose is to load so that pop-up appears. And if anybody else knows a different way to do that, that'd be great, but I could not find any other way to do that. So this one tab has this super simple web app builder that has one purpose: to have a blue map so there's something, but not clickable, and then have that pop up. And then as you go through the map and click on the various tabs, then most of these tabs are either loading dashboards or story maps, individual story maps to present the information.
That's pretty cool. I like that.
So this is why I think this is so, I used the story map for the container because that's what I knew, but I think the Experience Builder could be great for this. So hopefully that answered the question. But I was talking with somebody from Esri. It turned out a year ago, somebody from Esri moved in across the street from me. He's never at NEARC, but he works in the Boston office. And he called it a Franken app when I was describing it to him. Yep, that's about right.
Funny.
Anything else?
Okay, couple more questions. If I want to add a selector to filter a library collection subject field and the subjects contain multiple fields, for example, history, geography, art, how can I make this collection grouped with history, geography, and art respectively?
Yeah, I don't know. That would be really, it's one of the things that I've struggled with myself into figuring out how to do that. On the fly, I don't know. Definitely reach out to me afterwards. I'd be happy to try to help you figure it out. It may be that you have to use those fields potentially to generate another field that you could more cleanly categorize them by. I mean, that would be my approach, but definitely reach out to me. That sounds like a more complicated question. And I also am interested in learning the answer to that because the dashboards I built so far and the data are relatively simple. And so it works very well within one data layer, and it works very well if things are neatly sorted by field. But if you have things across multiple fields, it seems really tricky to do it. And that's where I hope to learn more. And actually, if anybody else out there has any ideas, I'd love to hear it. But please reach out to me afterwards and I'd be happy to try to look at it with you. So I feel like I'd learn a lot by that too.
Okay, can you review adding all to the buttons in the header?
Yes, this is like this was the most difficult thing for me to get my head around, and you could even see me still flailing with it a little bit. So when you have, when you first bring in and you set things up. So I said, yes, I want to do it by first time. I loaded the categories. By the way, override just means you're only going to override one category, but when you load categories, you get both of them up here. So the way that the default is for this selector would be that here's your two options in the database, in your field, right? You have long time or first time. But what if you wanted to see both long time and first time, right? Even though you basically wanted to show all of them that are in the field. So you could do multiple ways. First way you could do it was say, all right, instead of only having a single selection, I'm going to allow multiple selections. So if you allow multiple selections, then when the map first loads, the default is to have nothing selected. So it shows all of it. Although that didn't work, did it? Sometimes the first time you load something, it doesn't respect what you've said. By being able to click these on and off, you then can in effect show all of the things, but I feel like for the user, this can get pretty confusing. So this is the multiple selection that if you click off of something, it's turned off. So you could show all of them by clicking off of both of them. But to me, that seems like it's more complex and confusing. So the way that I would potentially handle that is instead of doing this multiple selection, you would say, all right, I'm going to go back to single selection, but then you don't have the option to basically say, show no filter. Or, in the same way as showing no filter, is show everything. When I click on this other option, I don't want you to filter it based on one of those categories. When I have no filter, it shows everything. So even though that's the show all, the way that you do it is by having a none option. So that means no filter. So I say, all right, I'm going to do a none option, and I'm going to call the label for none is going to be, oh, I always do that. The label for none is going to be all. And I know this is like mental, third day of the conference is mental gymnastics, but the none option of being all means when I click on all, have no filter. So don't constrain it by one of the categories, show me everything. But when I click on one of the categories, show me only the items that meet that category. So when you click on first time, it shows only first time. When you click on long time, it shows long time. When you click on all, you are choosing no filter, it shows everything. This is the thing that was by far the hardest thing for me to get my head around. That the none filter shows everything. And then how do you name things appropriately to get people to make sense out of what it is that they're clicking on? And that's why that load category and that descriptor for none is super valuable. You can
So
also
Shane-
have it, if it's on the left, so that the placement is first and the default selection is first, that means that when the map loads, all will be selected. But again, you could see, you could configure that differently. To me, this seems to make the most straightforward, but go ahead.
I was just going to say that we're at 10:57 and there's still more questions. So I hope that you'll have time, Shane, to maybe look through some of these. I'm trying to pick the ones that can be answered quickly, I guess. I don't know. So let me see. We just did that one. It looks like filters can cascade from one frame to the next, or one filter can affect changes in other frames directly.
Yeah.
Do you feel one direction or the other is a best practice?
Yeah, I don't even know. That's a really good question. I wind up, it should be that, I don't know the answer to that cleanly. I think that whatever you do that works is fine. It seems like you could actually have something filtering the map, but then the map also filtering that item. Yeah, I don't know that there's a right answer for that in what my experience is, but you could have things that are in essence filtering each other. But I will say that the trick with the map is that you do have the map actions that are different than the others. The map can do things by extent. So the combination of what things you want to filter by geography, you really only have the map that can reach out and filter other things. But yeah, I don't know that there's a specific best practice that I have seen or developed, but there's a whole bunch of different ways that you can have it work, which is not a satisfying answer, but it's the answer I have to give right now. Anybody else have any thoughts or opinions? Either speak now, but also as Pam said, that this is going to be in the Whova chat, and the Whova site's not going away. It's going to stay around, if I remember correctly, at least 6 months.
Yep,
So
I think so.
part of the reason for having the Whova site and doing the chat in there is that we could potentially continue to have conversations after the session ends and even after the conference ends. So there's a lot of food for conversation. I would say I'm now comfortable-ish with dashboards, and I've made some, and I definitely love to learn more, especially when it comes to more advanced strategies for including data. Because I do think that's one of the things I have the biggest weakness on, and partially because of the kind of data I have access to. So, but it definitely, there's no doubt that you have to kind of figure out the way the data are structured, or fooling, or using the tools that are within the system to display the options for people in the way that you'd like them to be displayed with the constraints of your data. So any discussion or exploration along those lines, I'm definitely enthusiastic about, because I think it's tricky to know, but also solutions that work for one person could often work for the other. And I'm very interested to know about Erica's work with related tables and what she's discovered, because she has done a whole bunch of this. And I think a lot of people are probably in a situation more like her, or there's a good portion of people in a situation more like her than they are in a situation like me with relatively simple data sets. But the other thing is, if you have a spreadsheet that's that simple, you can upload it and create a dashboard like this to interact with it. And I think that's incredibly powerful for people. It's one of the reasons I'm really interested in both using it inside of Extension, but also having this be one of our workshops. You do need a paid account, but there are ways for a lot of people to get a paid account that's not that much money, and being able to take relatively simply data sets, put them up, make a map, and do these things, I think is pretty compelling, even if you're not an intense GIS user. So, okay, well, it's
I would,
11, and I know I don't want people to miss out on the closing session at 11:15. So,
which I need to jump over to in a minute, but I wanted to also just point out that, you know, as trying to do this moderator role, I have marked some questions as answered. But by all means, folks, take a look at them. And if you have more input, and especially you, Shane, please add information in there. Because this is great. These questions have been really awesome. And I have 2 projects that I'm currently working on that have dashboards, and I'm so excited to take a lot of this information back tomorrow when I sit down at my desk and work, and use them. So thank you. This has been really informative to me. I think it's been very informative to all the folks that have been in the workshop. So.
Oh, great. Well, thank you. And my hope was to at least give people a chance to quickly grab a map that already existed and play with it and think through some possibilities. But I realize that people are at a lot of different levels, and hopefully no matter what level you're at, you got a little bit further forward. And I do look forward to either questions in the Whova app and conversations, or any other way to connect with people about this moving forward. So thanks. Make sure everybody goes to the closing session at 11:15.